So if you're looking to buy a house here in Phoenix, Arizona, a lot of people are thinking, okay, do I want an HOA or do I not want an HOA? Because we do have both sides of that coin here in Phoenix. So today I'm going to talk through the pros and cons of having or not having an HOA. What's up, everybody? So today we're talking through whether you should be buying a house with an HOA or non-HOA. So we're going to talk through the pros and cons of having an HOA or not having one. But before we get into any of that, hit subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Like the videos, share it with your friends. Trying to be a resource. Again, not trying to be famous, just trying to give accurate information to people so that way they can make an accurate decision when it comes to buying or selling a home. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so I'm going to try and talk through 3 pros and 3 cons. Before we get into that stuff, though, the biggest thing you have to understand is homes that have HOAs are typically newer homes, especially here in Phoenix. So prior to probably 2000 is when we had a lot of homes that just didn't have HOAs. And then they started popping up in the 90s and then became much more common after 2000. So it's one of those that when you're looking at a home that's built in the 1990s, some of them will have HOAs, some of them won't. It's probably maybe 60-40, 60% have them, 40% don't in the 90s. And then after 2000, almost all homes have an HOA. And the question is, well, what does an HOA do? And this is where we get into the pros and cons, right? So first pro is just value. An HOA is trying to keep the value of your home. And you're like, wait, what? What does that mean? So here's the biggest thing. They're trying to control the neighborhood. And yes, I know, can HOAs have Karens in them? 100% they can. Trust me, I know. We used to live in one where we had some Karens, but we voted them out, so it's fine. But it's one of those that they're trying to, normally, a normal HOA is trying to say, hey, we don't want anything to be really trashy around here. We want it to look nice. So that way, everyone's values aren't affected. So let's say you have a house, and on each side of your house, you have dumps, just people with just crappy houses. They're not keeping up with it. It could hurt the value of your home because people don't want to buy it. So an HOA is trying to keep the value of your home by keeping everything looking the same, or at least just looking nice, keeping the neighborhood up to where they need to be. So that's the first thing that, as a pro, an HOA is going to do. The con on the other side of that, though, is it's going to limit what you can do in an HOA, right? So when you have an HOA, what you do to the exterior of the home is limited. Like maybe you can't do crazy colors. Maybe you can't put something up. Every HOA is different on what the regulations are. Like some HOAs can be really strict where you can't even have a shed showing on the side of your house or something. But most HOAs are fine with that. Really, they just don't want you to build a structure in the back, like a casita or something massive back there. But it does limit you when you have an HOA to where it's like, okay, like I can't do everything I may want to do. And it depends on the type of lifestyle you have, right? So that's where you have to kind of balance that, where it's like, okay, can I do I need an HOA? Do I not need an HOA? That's something that you're going to have to balance through. So the second pro would be accountability for your neighbors. So like the first pro was they're trying to keep your value. Well, how do they do that? It's by accountability throughout the neighborhood. Now, that can be good and bad, right? Because there are some neighborhoods where they're just crazy, where they're Karens that will drive by your house. Like I lived in an HOA where they would drive by the houses every day and they'd be taking pictures with their phones and then you get a fine, and we would always fight it. And eventually we voted those people out, like I said, but it's one of those that every HOA is going to be different. And so it's one of those that the good part of that though is, again, people cannot have crappy homes in the neighborhood. They're going to get fined. They're going to have issues because the reality is if the HOA is fining you, you can't not pay it. Because if you go to sell that house, it's a lien on the house after a certain amount of time. So it's one of those that keeps accountability where people have to keep the neighborhood nice. They can't just let it go. They can't have their grass be 2 feet high. They can't have weeds just everywhere. They can't have all that. I know that can get annoying, and maybe there are some people that are a little too, much of a stickler. But it is good, especially for values of homes, to have that accountability in an HOA. Now, again, I always say look online because a lot of times there's groups that talk about these HOAs. You can see whether they're really crazy or not. But that takes us into the con, right? So the con is the cost. You pay for an HOA. Non-HOA communities, you are not paying for an HOA. But what you're paying for typically in an HOA is, hey, we need that accountability. We need, a lot of the communities today have parks. So keeping the parks nice and all of that stuff. So it's one of those that there is a cost when it comes to HOAs. Now, the one thing I will tell you is typically you can tell when an HOA is more involved. The more typically, all right, not always, but the more you pay for an HOA, the more involved they are. the more a stickler that they are. So if your HOA is like 30, 40 bucks a month, all right, that's not too bad. Once you get over $100, it's like, oh, well, maybe they're going to be a lot more involved. So especially the newer build communities, if you buy a house that's been built in the past couple of years, your HOA is going to be up near probably $70 to $100 a month because they want to keep everything nice because everything's brand new. So it's one of those that, with HOAs, you're going to have HOAs that you pay monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually. Most of them are either quarterly or monthly. So, and to give you a range, like if it's not a brand new build home, typical HOAs, depending on where you are, outside of Scottsdale, okay, are going to be anywhere from, 40 to 120 bucks, somewhere in that range, depending on how nice the community is. And it could be higher than that. So rule of thumb is the more you pay for an HOA, the nicer the community should be and the more involved they're going to be. So that's just a con because you do have to pay for it. The third pro is it's a newer home. If you're buying a house that has an HOA, more than likely it is a newer home. When I say newer, I mean less than 30 years old, right? So there are, especially here in Phoenix, there's houses that go back in the 1950s, even earlier, depending on where you are in Phoenix. But if you're not in those areas, if you're in like Peoria, Glendale, or, going outside of central Phoenix, then, and you have an HOA, it's probably post 2000, probably a little bit newer home. So that means less issues that you're going to have to deal with. So that's a great thing. That's a pro because it's like, hey, I don't have to deal with those things. The third con, I would say, is a lot of newer homes just don't have a lot of character. They don't, because it's one of those that everything is kind of uniform. Especially the homes that were built in the past 10 years, they all look the same. They only had 4 or 5 models, maybe 6. And so it's one of those that a lot of the houses look the same. The colors are uniform, and some people love that. But there are a lot of people who are like, no, I want an older home because it doesn't have the character that I want. So that would be the third con. And here's the biggest thing I would tell people when they're considering whether they're buying a house in an HOA or non-HOA. A lot of people have these stigmas when it comes to HOAs that, oh, it's awful. It's not. Now, are there communities that can be? Sure. But you can effectuate change by voting people out or going to those meetings and stuff like that. So it is one of those that I wouldn't just label something as, oh, it has an HOA, we don't want to live there. No. There are some very nice communities with HOAs that aren't crazy. And that's probably the average. There are some crazy communities out there, but I would say that's not the majority. So it's one of those that make sure you're talking with your real estate agent about what that HOA is requiring, because you can find the CC&Rs and different things that they're requiring from your real estate agent. So make sure you talk with them. Guys, if you don't have a real estate agent, I would love to talk to you about it. I'd love to talk with you about the pros and cons of it and what you're looking for in a home. So please reach out to me. My information is in the description. Guys, you've been listening to The Real.